Hey, how you guys doing? Welcome to Extract Talks. This is where we get together with you to talk about what's going on with us. Been doing a GMP series here. There's all the regulations that are out there, and people are wondering about how to apply them, what to apply, when to apply, where in the process do they apply, and people generally want to be compliant with the regulations that are out there because they're common. A lot of it is common sense.
Oh,
right?
yeah, for the most part. Yeah, and then to keep people safe, keep the environment safe, make sure everybody's on the up and up.
Today we're going to go over a little bit related to product and process, okay?
All right.
And we had touched on this last time with our risk assessment, of course. And you would follow the same risk assessments, really establish what your critical processes are, what your critical equipment is, how you really go about developing and understanding what those critical elements are, and how do you go about really understanding what your process parameters are that really need to be established. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. A lot of people, what they do is they say, oh, we're just going to measure everything. They hire an army of QC technicians, and they're recording the temperature and pressure and humidity in the conference room. Okay, or equivalent thereof, because they haven't done the risk assessment. What is the risk of cross-contamination? What's the risk of external contamination? And control the specific areas then that need to be monitored. So rather than just going ahead and doing all the hard work of doing that risk assessment, which it is hard to do, they just decide to measure everything. That's not a good substitute. You haven't really looked at what is critical in terms of cross-contamination, external contamination. If you're not doing it, you're just measuring everything. What are you really doing? So you're just measuring it, and you're thinking that GMP is taking data on each room and measuring it and multiplying that and showing a graph and graphing it out and saying, hey, we're stable on that. That's actually not what it is. It's actually a risk assessment that says, okay, this is really important for cross-contamination, therefore we're going to measure it and control it, as opposed to everything else. That may not need that. GMP really is understanding what is risk averse, what is risky in terms of each one of those processes, procedures, and then putting in the right controls and the right processes, the right people, the right training, the right facilities, all those things to really help
make it all work together.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, we got resources.
Oh man. More resources than you can shake a stick at.
Yeah. We've been in the business of educating people in this industry all around the world now.
Yeah.
And
we have constantly getting feedback from people all over the place. Mexico, Thailand. Everywhere people taking
Japan, China, India, Pakistan, in Africa.
Everywhere.
All the way through. Yeah. So we get people interfacing with, we get lots of emails. I get a lot of mail saying, hey, just thanks for doing all that. Really, I learned a lot from what you guys have put together. So
if you like what we got, don't be afraid to leave us a review.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely helps other people see our content. And the more people that grow and learn in this industry, the further we're going to go forward quicker.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go onto the Google, go to Google review, look up our company, extraktLAB, and say, write a Google review. It's pretty simple, and say, hey, do you like it? Or
don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid to say you love it. Don't be afraid to say you love us. I love those guys. Also, you can subscribe, since we're on the subject of things.
Our podcast, our YouTube page.
Whatever
your favorite podcast, Google, Spotify. I think those are two of the biggest ones, but I think April's put us on everything, hasn't she?
Yeah, pretty much. So we're on all your podcast platforms. So you go ahead and we're broadcasting all over the world to all different podcast stations. So we're looking at this ICH thing. We've been talking of all the guidances that are put out by the International Committee on Harmonization, and these are really guidance for different countries where they can use the guidance to create either their law, or maybe even just say, hey, look, we're going to follow this guidance and we're going to create regulations around the guidance. Maybe we're not even going to create regulations. Maybe you say, hey, you have to do this and we're going to measure the output. That's another thing that people do. But we had been talking specifically about quality risk management in the last system, or the last go round. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about good manufacturing practices, which are the Q7 portion of that.
GMP.
And specifically the development of, which is in Chapter 19. Okay. As you get to start to implement all the different operations, and having a background also in analytical chemistry, quality control, and quality assurance, and having implemented anywhere from ISO all the way through to Part 211 and 210 and then part 111 and food safety systems and stuff, you get to see generalized themes that happen because they're all reflecting one another.
Yeah.
Okay. Just make sure that you have the things that need to be controlled. Make sure you have a process in the data to show that they have to be controlled. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to talk really about how to really create that process and how to really create what kind of product considerations you need to take into account. Now, a lot of people, they start with a small batch, right? Maybe a professor does something in the laboratory, they can make it at a microgram scale. And this is going to be great. We're going to make billions of dollars because we can make it at a microgram scale.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of times what a pharmaceutical company will do is they will take that microgram scale and they'll scale it up to a kilogram scale or maybe a little bit less. Okay. And that's called the pilot process. Okay. And that's because they need to do clinical trials. They're going to feed it to people or dogs or rats or whatever they're going to do in their clinical trials. James, we got James, how's it going over there? We got that 5,000 milligram one. Yeah, how's it treating you? He's falling asleep. Oh man, we should have given him that much.
No, they got to label those better.
Yeah, I guess we missed the decimal point.
Oh,
shoot. Okay, so we aimed at defining the GMPs for small batch and clinical development. That's because obviously, when you're starting in the laboratory, it's not the same as when you're operating at 15,000 tons a day.
Yes, much different.
When you call us and you ask us, hey, what do we need to do to really get operational? We do assessment on how big you're going to be and what your intended use is. We try to define the products that you want out of it, and then try to come up with a flow sheet, a worksheet that would include like equipment arrangement, things like that for a smaller operation. And then we give you an option to really build that up. What we call a crawl, walk, run process, right?
Yeah.
So you crawl, you walk, you run, just like we've.
Well, you want to figure out what you're doing before you just jump in, which is totally doable. You just, it's got to be set up properly.
Right,
you
exactly.
want to crawl before you jump right
start
into
off with something pilot. So
yeah, exactly.
That's what this chapter 19 is about.
All right.
It's really, hey, the GMPs that we're talking about in the rest of the Q7, but we're recognizing that as you move through your development process, you're going to have increasing amounts of GMPs, and so you figure those out. So really it helps identify the critical units, unit processes, critical unit operations, critical process parameters, things like that. So typically what people do is what they have called a life cycle stage or a life cycle product development.
Okay.
And
the whole life of as you're developing that particular API or product.
And there's lots of variations on this, which is a promulgation of development processes. So they have, stage gate. People have been talking about different ways of doing this, but the life cycle stage is essentially it's looking at the product from the very concept of the molecule all the way through to the actual,
intended effect?
No, the actual release, and then the actual, maybe it will be replaced by a new product later on.
Oh,
for example.
okay.
So even the end of life of the
actual product itself.
It's taking the whole entire.
All right.
And sometimes you would want to understand what that looks like, even from environmental fate or how people get rid of their drugs after they haven't used them, for example. Do they flush them down?
That's what the doctor tells us.
And all the estrogens in the water. So that's the type of thing that a whole life cycle assessment would try to understand. Okay, identification, how to create and purify the molecules, and then pilot process to help identify critical operations and parameters. So again, you're doing the identification. Okay, here's the molecule that we want. Here's the pharmacological effect that we think it has. And we're going to test it out to see if it does have that. And then we're going to figure out how to create this molecule. Are we going to let the plant do it, or are we going to let the chemists after this? Right?
Yeah,
we got to wonder if the chemists are always trying to do it on their own. Cheaper,
just mix a little acid.
We can synthesize that. We get in a little bit of acid, little three drams of bat's wings, four gazintas of gazintas. Okay. But anyway, so that's how you would identify how to create. And typically, the organicer chemists typically do this. So the organickers,
The organickers, is that a
technical term?
Chemists?
No, I just call them organickers because you got to have at least one of them around if you have to. No, that's the analytical insult to the organicker chemist. No harm. It was a geek humor there. Okay, so pilot process to help identify critical operations and parameters, define, improve, and scale the process, and that's really where that chapter 19 kind of produces small quantities for clinical trials, chemical testing, profiling, things like that. And then we go into process manufacturing. So that's the life cycle stages that you would typically do. And then the purpose of development, again, we're talking about development of the process so that you can identify, for example, what the critical processes are. Okay. So a lot of times, if you just go into your risk assessment and you don't know and you've never made the molecule, are you really going to be able to assess the proper
all the different risks that
all
can
the different
affect?
No, you're not going to be able to.
Right.
You have to have knowledge
Right.
about it, and you're building up that knowledge one step at a time. Okay.
Yep.
And then you are also continuously actually doing risk assessments as you add in, oh, hey, we need a filtration process in here, or hey, we need to change this over so that we have another reactor. And by the way, we can't use that other reactant material because it's creating this side product that's toxic. Okay, things like that.
Yeah.
Right? So you're building up information as you go along. And so oftentimes you need to continuously update your risk assessment. It's good to start off with something like that. But on the same time, it's hard to actually create a risk assessment if you know nothing about the process. If you just have
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
if you're just shooting in the dark on what
so
might go wrong.
The purpose of development is really to create the information that you need to do a proper risk assessment, or create the information that you need to properly scale up.
Okay.
Or provide the scientific rationale for applying the GMPs to the APIs, for example, which means what are we going to control and what molecule are we going to control and how are we going to control it?
Yeah, that's a lot to...
A lot of times, are we going to put GMP processing, are we going to put GMP controls on a field that's growing 1,000 acres of hemp?
Right. There's no way you can
Probably
control
not.
all the
No. So you
bugs
need to
and
understand
birds.
what the scientific rationale is for creating the GMPs. Okay. Right. Provide data for selecting the critical unit operations. So oftentimes you don't know it. If you don't have experience or you don't have a subject matter expert who's done it before, you wouldn't know, for example, what to apply. And this is what I was alluding to before. People just apply them because for the sake of applying them and thinking that's GMP, which is not.
Right. That's just what they assume is GMP.
Okay, let's go measure everything. That's just ridiculous. Don't do that. Okay. If someone tells you to do that in your business, you actually have to realign that person to a risk-based approach.
Okay, not a data.
Yeah.
That'd be a data-based approach.
Yeah.
Well, you're not even getting the proper data because you're not.
You have to have the risk assessment really establish your critical processes and procedures.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Without that, you're just measuring and wasting money and time.
Yeah.
And looking like you are doing a lot of activity.
Because you're getting sheets and sheets full of...
look at all this work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Establish controlled process parameters and then evaluate the sensitivity of the process parameters on the quality parameters. So, like, for example, okay, we're going to measure temperature in this room.
All right.
Okay, and what are we going to create in this room? We're going to do a distillation process, right? Okay, so here we got a distillation process we're going to do in this room, in our podcast room. We're going to do it. Does it really matter if it's 21 degrees or 24 degrees in here when we're running our process at 300, plus? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, probably
absolutely.
not. Probably not. Okay. It doesn't make a difference. It's not going to have any impact on the final product quality. It may have an impact on you and I wanting to be in the room, but it wouldn't have an impact on the product quality because it would be in the machine.
Right.
Machines at elevated temperature. It's more or less insensitive to,
Outside
1 or
effects.
2 degrees fluctuation in the temperature of the room. All right. So this is what I'm talking about. So really, you need to apply, like, first of all, common sense, subject matter experts. And then for those things that you think might have an impact, you would want to establish a good measurement basis for showing that it is an impactful thing.
You're not just giving that data of, oh, hey, there's a temperature influx, but you're backing it up with, this is how it's affecting our product
with
or
data,
our process.
With data. And that, again, that's all going back to, okay, you have to create the specifications for what you want out of it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have anything to measure it against. You have to have specs to measure. Right?
So you have to do something before you can even start measuring something.
I can't tell you how much work this is. It's a lot of work. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why you have literally armies of, engineers and process engineers and chemists and analytical chemists and organic chemists, and they're all working together as a team, along with oftentimes facilities design people, equipment experts, to get the full picture of what's happening. Yeah. Okay. One of the things that a lot of people are confused about and one of the things that you really need to establish when you start looking at what is GMP and what is not GMP, especially in the area of bringing a botanical into like an API or a pharmaceutical product, okay, is when does the GMP start and when does it end?
Yeah, we've gotten some questions about that.
Right? When does it start? Okay, so this comes right from the Q7, and you can see here, this is the type of manufacturing, and actually, interestingly enough, it specifically calls out API extracted from plant sources.
Okay.
And you can see that the guidance, which is the Q7 guidance, he does not take into account the collection of the plant. It doesn't really, it's out of scope.
Yep.
What it's saying is that when you collect the plants out of the field, it's out of scope. It's not a GMP process. Okay. Now, this is cutting and initial extractions. Okay. So that is interesting. You might interpret that to say, okay, that extraction itself, as you take the plant out of the field, you're cutting it up, you're grinding it up, you're drying it, and then you're bringing it to extraction.
Yep.
And then that it's saying that's out of the GMP process.
All right.
Okay. So there's a question now.
Okay. Where does it really start?
Right now. Okay. So what's the answer to this? What does it is extraction included or not? And because you can see here, if you get the extraction, you can put it into the material processes afterward, and then it starts to become applicable to the API starting process.
Okay.
The key thing here is that it really depends on the region. If you're in the U.S., it's different than in the EU.
Okay.
So in the U.S., you really need to establish the scientific rationale for where you would start your API process. Okay, did you want to put it at the beginning where there's extractions? Then you have to have a scientific rationale that it would be included in a GACP process or a good agricultural and collection process instead of a GMP process, okay?
Yep.
In Europe, they've defined it a little bit more, and they've erred on the side of more GMPs than agricultural practices. So for example, right here's the HMPC, which is the European guideline on GACP. In the case of herbal preparations, we're talking about specifically the production and primary processing of a medicinal plant herbal substance has a direct influence on the quality of the API.
Yeah.
And therefore, it would have good manufacturing practice for the manufacturing, processing, packaging, and storage of active pharmaceutical ingredients. Also applies to medicinal plants and herbal substances. Medicinal plants and herbal substances.
Yep.
And then here's herbal preparations. So these are all actually defined herbal plants, herbal substances, herbal preparations. They're all different, okay?
Yep.
There is definitely the need to add GMPs, for example, to the extraction process. And there's also, it wouldn't necessarily be considered to be under GACP control, the extraction process in Europe. If you were in the US, I think you would have a better argument that you could, for example, say, hey, look, what's coming out of here is you have a good scientific rationale for why it could be under a good agricultural practice. And as long as you have the scientific rationale for it, and it's solid, and it's based on good science, I think you're fine. But you have to have the scientific rationale for whichever way you go. Yep. There's a lot of questions here, like, for example, suppose you have a 10-step process to create a molecule, and in step 4 you add one ingredient in, and then you have one process. Where does the GMPs begin? Does it begin at step 1, or does it begin at step 4, or does it begin at step 5? So
is that up to a company to?
That's what I'm trying to say. So
figure
it's
out.
In the sense of you have to have the scientific rationale when the GMP starts, when the API process starts, and when it doesn't. Okay, and that would include anyone in Europe and in the U.S. Actually, you still have to have that scientific basis and rationale. When you look at this, can extraction steps be under GAP or GACP or ISO control? That what we're really talking about here is this first step right here, all the way up, including extraction. So receiving raw material, grinding station, ground material, and then over here, obviously growing, harvesting, right? All that. Usually this is under GACP control. So the question is, where does blue start? Where's the black stop? Where's the blue start? And actually they're overlapping. Okay.
All right.
This is really the questionable stuff right here, that you really need to have a scientific rationale for whatever you decide to do. Yep. You need to have that rationale.
Whether it's once that machine kicks on, or whether it's when that material comes out of the machine.
Right. So when you get through an audit process, you need to be able to defend why you did what you did and what the data was and how it will impact it. Now, a lot of people argue that there's really no difference there are major differences between the GACP and good agricultural practices and GMP.
Okay.
But the ideas are the same. In other words, if it's critical, you need to control it. If it's not critical, you don't control it. You're trying to get rid of cross-contamination, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Within the field, you're doing that all the time. You wouldn't have marijuana field and a hemp field right next to each other, right?
No, you wouldn't want that.
No, because you'd ruin your marijuana plant because it would get seeded and out. Yeah. So obviously people are interested in understanding how that would be controlled. So
if they're still fighting it.
Yeah, they're still fighting it. Yeah, exactly. So make sure that you have the right scientific rationale for whatever you guys decide to do. And a lot of the guidance has already been given. For example, if you are in Europe. In the U.S., I didn't see anything, but there might be some stuff that I haven't seen yet. But I know that whatever you do, you have to have a scientific rationale.
Yeah. Okay,
this is another graph that came from the HPMC here, and you can see here, clearly they're saying right here, this part 2 is the API production part of Q7, and this part 1 is really the packaging and the finished goods. Okay, and here you can see GACP. So you can see clearly in Europe, lichens, so cutting, drying of plants is under this GACP. And then here, when you express it from the plants, then it becomes an API. Okay. So they're already telling, hey, you guys, you're not going to be able to
do GMP until
you're not going to be able to say that extraction's not in GMP.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's essentially what they're saying here. You can hear they're being very explicit about it. Comminution, which is grinding. Processing of extrudates, extraction from plants. That's pretty specific, right?
Yeah.
So fractionation, things like that, all part of the API production process. It's pretty clear. It's less clear if you're in the US, you may be able to argue, but I think a lot of people are using that to really understand if they can add, the farther they bring GAP up in here, the less costly the product. Essentially.
Okay, because they're not having to validate all those other parts of the process.
Yeah, they still have to validate. It's just the level of control and
the control.
Although some people who run GACP or GAP don't agree with that. They want to apply GMP levels of control to GAP and GACP. Yeah. I think it really depends on your consultant that you have. Okay. Right. And one thing about consulting this area that's interesting is that no consultant that you hire is going to want to underdo it.
Oh, right.
So I think that the tendency in general in the industry is to overdo GMPs because they don't want to have the owners coming back and saying, oh, you didn't do that. So because owners are aggressive in that way, you're going to have to pay more. Everybody's going to have to pay more because there's they're covering their butt, whatever. Yeah. A rational approach would be to identify what's required and do what's required.
Yeah.
Use your risk assessment, get the data, defend it scientifically, rather than overdoing anything. Yeah. Because what you're actually doing there is you are burdening the overall API and the cost of the API with forever. You don't have the data, don't do it. That's all. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
And don't over apply. Yeah. So anyway, that was just some ideas. So here's the purpose of development again, is to provide a scientific rationale, provide the data, get those control processes and evaluate the sensitivity of the processes. Okay. We really talked about the first one, which was providing the scientific rationale for GMPs to API. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about selecting operations, equipment, parameters, establishing process parameters and things like that. And then we're going to talk about how to evaluate the sensitivity, maybe applying some tests, some statistical tests.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, all right.
Sounds like it could be fun.
Yeah. You're welcome to join us next time for more of this wonderful GMP talk.
I love it.
On Extract Talks, we're going to be continuing our GMP series. So thanks a lot. Hope you guys had a good time. Yeah. And we'll talk to you guys later. See you later. Bye.
Bye.